Welcome to Connection Academy podcast, a series of conversations on what success might look like in a truly connected world. One where we have a better understanding of ourselves, each other, and the endless possibilities of life around us. I'm your host, Kristen Ransom. On today's episode, we speak with Cassey Chambers, who is the Operations Director for Africa's largest mental health organization called SADAG, the South African Depression and Anxiety Group.
Everyone should be informed about mental health. It could be someone in your household. It could be, within your own friend circle. It's difficult to have these heavy conversations. No one really wants to talk about depression or things like suicide until there's a problem, and then you're forced to talk about it.
This episode is part of a larger series discussing mental health and well-being, a topic which I really believe has needed more spotlight in the past and has become ever more relevant as more of us are dealing with heightened levels of uncertainty, stress, anxiety, and perhaps even periods of depression. The title of today's episode is an introduction to mental health. And why we needed to start with an introduction is because the reality is that many of us were not taught about mental health in school. We were never read definitions of mental health and mental illness. We weren't briefed on how to handle the stresses and anxiety of day-to-day life. And importantly, we were never taught how to isolate when we might need help and how we can be of help to others. Today's conversation aims at addressing some of these important points. Lean in and enjoy. So, considering mental health is a rising global health concern, can you give us a bit more of an overview of what SADAG's mission is in this space?
So SADAG has been around for over 26 years, and we've really seen how mental health has changed over the years. When we first started, our own founder started the group because there wasn't much information about things like depression or anxiety or panic disorder. And there was a lot of, being pushed from pillar to post and just not knowing enough resources or even just how to navigate getting treatment. And she sets it up as her own little support group from home and just helping direct people from her own personal experience. And that's kind of how it snowballed, with so many people reaching out and just wanting to connect with others, wanting to understand, wanting to learn more about mental health. And, that was one helpline and one support group 26 years ago. And now we're sitting with over 23 helplines and over 200 support groups just here in South Africa, because there's a need for people to connect and to reach out and to feel more understood. And when we look more at the stats of who does this affect in the country, we are dealing with about 1 in 3 South Africans who have or will have a mental health issue at some point in their lifetime. 1 in 3 is a lot of people. It could be someone that you're sitting across from your office desk, or someone that you're standing at a queue with in the shopping center, or someone in your classroom. And I think when you're putting it into that perspective and some of the additional challenges that we have in South Africa, like stigma, where, so many people are preventing from going out and getting help, but also that we have a very high suicide rate. We have about 23 completed suicides every single day in the country and 460 attempted suicides every 24 hours. And this is one of the things that drives SADAG, to try to do as much as we can to create awareness, to support people, and just get them help before it's too late.
Wow. Yeah, I think I've definitely expressed my admiration for you and your line of work in the past, but I just want to state that again. I think the work that you guys are doing is really incredible. The fact that you've created a space for people to step into, ask for help, learn about what mental health is and how to really equip oneself to grow forward from it is really amazing.
Oh, thank you.
So today we're chatting about defining and identifying mental health. And I think something important to raise is the reality is that most of us are not taught about mental health in school. And then after school, many of us have experienced the stigma around mental health, which not only prevents many healing conversations from happening, but it also prevents the willingness and curiosity to learn more about what mental health is and how it might be impacting us and people that we know. So, Cassey, maybe it could be useful if you could give us a high-level definition of what is mental health.
So the best way that we can kind of describe it and how we do this when we speak to people on the phone or in talks is that mental illness is a whole body illness. It's not just something that you've imagined or something that you've thought up in your head or it's invisible. It affects your whole entire body, the way that you function, the way that you behave, the way that you think, the way that you act, the way that you feel about yourself. It has both the emotional symptoms, that sadness, that heavy feeling, that anxiety, but also there's physical symptoms. So again, it just reinforces that body-mind connection where you can have headaches, you have digestive problems, backache, neck pains, migraines, sleeplessness. Mental health or mental illness actually changes the chemicals in your body, so your body functions differently. So one of the things that some people say who have depression or anxiety or mental illness, that food tastes differently. And often one of the side effects is people stop eating or losing their appetite or just even their mood to have food. And it's because chemicals actually change the way food tastes in your mouth. So it's really a whole body illness that affects your daily functioning every single day. So it's not something that you can switch on and off. It happens from the time that you wake up in the morning till the time that you go to bed every day. When it starts to be concerning, everyone has good days and bad days. We feel happy, we feel sad, and that's completely normal. And you should have that fluctuation in mood. I think when it starts to become a problem is when it starts to impact your daily functioning. So you can't get out of bed, you can't concentrate, you can't get to work, you don't want to be around people. When it starts to impact your daily functioning for 2 to 4 weeks, then you should know that something serious is wrong and you need to get help.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, something that I've noticed with people in my life that have suffered from mental health issues in the past is that often it almost creeps in such a way that sometimes it's not like you wake up one day, you're fine, and the next day you're not. And because of that slow creeping in effect, it can be difficult to note that, hey, my normal has changed. And it's really useful to have a support system of friends or family around that can also help monitor and call out some of those changes that you might be experiencing, such as fluctuations in your mood or your sleeping patterns, your eating patterns, and so on.
Absolutely. And I think, again, because we're not taught about mental health when we're little, we're kind of taught happy and sad. And when we're sad, people keep on telling us, don't feel sad, don't cry. And especially boys, they're not encouraged to express their emotions or even have emotions. So it's really hard for us to kind of, learn to express ourselves, which is why we find that teenagers are so much more at risk because they don't know how to communicate or share. I'm not coping, or I feel anxious or nervous. We don't name those feelings, and we're not taught that from a young age until you're an adult and you're dealing with so much and it's so confusing. And we don't often connect the physical symptoms to how you're feeling. We're taught to separate that. And actually, it's very connected. And that's what we try to do is just educating people about what it is, what it isn't, what to look out for, whether it be for yourself or for a loved one. I think it's incredibly crucial just to be a bit more informed because, again, when you look at the stats and the numbers, it could be someone in your household. It could be, within your own friend circle. Everyone should be informed about mental health.
I know there's loads of different philosophies in terms of what is the purpose of life. And one that really resonates with me is the purpose of life is simply to live and to live fully in whatever sense that means to you. This is why I think it's our responsibility to have a conversation about mental health. The fact that it is such a growing global concern that, as you said, 1 in 3 people are suffering at any given point with mental health. We need to chat about this because if people are not enjoying life to the fullest or living life in its fullest experience, and there is something that we can do about that, then it's our responsibility to lean in and have a conversation and educate ourselves on how we can better support one another.
Absolutely. And I think, just having those kind of aha moments and finding ways to absorb what mental health is. And what's portrayed in the media or what's portrayed in movies is mental illness is that crazy person who's locked away in the corner of a really dodgy hospital and it's kind of shaking back and forward, and it's the scary, dangerous, doesn't make sense. It's not necessarily the picture of the person who lives in your household or your mom or your best friend. And I think it's about breaking down those barriers to understand what mental health is. And one of the things we always try to find ways to understand what mental health is or mental illness is. We understand a physical health issue, diabetes, cancer, hypertension, but yet we can't understand that an organ of our body, like our brain, if something is wrong, it would impact us. And yet if you've got diabetes, you'll take medication and treatment. And if you've got cancer, you go for treatment. And yet with mental health, it starts to become abstract and we think, well, it's a brain. Our brain is also an organ within our body. And if something's not right, then all of a sudden people are questioning it. And I heard a really fantastic talk a couple of weeks ago, and the expert was saying, every day we brush our teeth in the morning and we brush our teeth at night. And we actually spend more time brushing our teeth than focusing on our mental health. Children are taught from a young age about the importance of, brushing your teeth and oral hygiene, and yet we're not teaching our kids and our teenagers and adults about mental health, and yet it's the most important organ of our body. It's the most important part of our daily functioning. So I think that in itself, it just shows you how important mental health should be to everyone.
I read a beautiful metaphor about this too. You were mentioning our internal system. And the metaphor was saying, when you get a notification on your cell phone saying, hey, you need to update the software, we do it because we know that if we don't update the software, that internal software is not going to be able to keep up with my apps and this device that I want to keep using throughout the day. So we click the update button, we might leave it for a few minutes and maybe reset the phone, and then we can carry on working it. I think the same can be said about our internal operating system as human beings. Knowing when is that notification popping up, what does it mean to click the reset button, and how can we check in on, is our software up to date? You mentioned that we are learning a lot about external health, such as diabetes, etc. I mean, how I think about mental health versus physical health, it's like if you tripped and broke your ankle, you're not going to carry on walking on that broken ankle for weeks on end and maybe just complain about it. You're going to go get it checked out. And we've been taught, hey, my ankle is broken. I can go to a doctor. They can do an x-ray and put a cast on it. And it will be, 6 to 8 weeks, and then it will be healed. But I can't help but feel that the average person doesn't know, hey, I've had a mental trip. Something's not right. They don't know what's the next step. So I think these kind of conversations to raise awareness are incredibly important because it can show people that there is a path forward.
Exactly. And I think it also encourages people, just because you can't see it. Like you say, the analogy of the broken ankle is such an important one because I think everyone can relate and be like, oh, yes, I would definitely do that. But when it comes to mental health, there's that shame, there's that uncertainty about what to do or where to go or how do I even navigate this. But it's the same sense that we're okay with talking about it and getting help, but when it comes to something you cannot physically see, like a depression or anxiety, then we really battle to take it seriously or to understand that it's also as important as any other physical health issue. But also giving these types of examples to parents, to friends, to colleagues on how to start that conversation, because often it's difficult to have these heavy conversations. I mean, no one really wants to talk about depression or things like suicide until there's a problem, and then you're forced to talk about it. And we try and make it a little bit easier using these types of examples so that people can start getting used to having conversations around the dinner table about depression or anxiety or what made me feel sad, and that it's okay to have these types of conversations and to talk about it, not just when there's a problem or there's a crisis.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think this is an important part for us to chat a bit about the stigma that exists around mental health. And just to give a definition of stigma, it says here, a stigma is a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. And I really thought that considering that mental health and experiencing poor mental health is a very normal part of life, applying stigma to mental health and in doing so injecting shame, insecurity, and disgrace to me seems like a huge injustice and barrier towards us taking action on this growing mental health crisis. What are some of those top stigmas that you see cropping up in the space of mental health?
So it's a really interesting topic, and something that we even still deal with very heavily in South Africa, being very much majority of the community, especially the African culture, not accepting mental illness, where there isn't even a Zulu word for depression. So what we find is that you get the stigma from communities where people around you start to shame you, humiliate you, discriminate against you, or even treat you differently. But there's also the self stigma. Because of my own mental health issue, I stigmatize against myself. I think I'm weak. I think I can't do stuff. I think that people are going to be mocking me or ridiculing me. And it's the problem with stigma is that it prevents people from going out to get help, because you don't want to be seen going to a counselor or seen going to a psychologist. You don't want people to know that perhaps you need to take medication, and that fear of being seen as a weakness or crazy or dangerous. And again, it's how it's been perceived over the years. And one of the biggest ways to combat stigma is just to educate people what it is, what it isn't, what are the signs and symptoms, and how to get help. And one of the biggest things that we use at SADAG is that real life experience. People who have been there, done that, got the t-shirt, people who can share what depression was like for them and who they are and how they function. And once we start to break down that negative stereotype of what we think mental illness is with real people that we see every day, then people start to realize, oh, okay, it's not that bad, or no, they're not crazy or dangerous or weak. And I think it's something that we constantly work at, because just the 1 minute that you can tackle stigma and a family understand and they become more empowered, there's another story of someone who perhaps was discriminated at work because they shared that they had bipolar disorder. So it still happens every single day, but something that we just try to create as much awareness around as possible to encourage more people to get help. You don't want people to not get help or to get treatment because they're too scared what other people are going to say.
I've been in so many talks where the person on stage says, put up your hand if you know someone who is currently suffering or has suffered from mental health. And just about every single hand goes up time and time again. And for me, that really emphasizes our responsibility to educate ourselves on how can we be better friends, better family members, better colleagues to those that are perhaps not in the best mental space. Do you have any advice on how can we start the conversation and how can we hold that conversation?
As in a generation where we're learning so much more to be open to things like gender and sexuality and race and religion and background, why shouldn't we be more accepting to mental health? And I think a lot of people, the fear is just because they don't know. They don't know what to say, they don't know what to do. And it's a difficult conversation often to have. So what we tend to do is, the first step as a family member or loved one is to educate yourself. Learn as much as you can about what it is, read stories, and in a world where there's so much information online at your fingertips, you can really understand a lot by doing some of your own homework and research. And it also shows how invested you are and how much you care, that you would spend that time to understand what is going on with your loved one. And I think people just appreciate it if they don't have to always be the expert to say, this is what's wrong with me, this is what it is. But for you to take that time to research and understand, I think it speaks volumes to anyone who's feeling so alone and trying to navigate this. When you're dealing with any other health issue like diabetes, you go to a doctor who tells you, take this medication, do this, don't do that. They give you a menu plan. But with mental health, you're kind of having to navigate and deal with your illness by yourself, and it can be incredibly lonely and isolating. So in the absence of not always knowing what to do, is you don't, as a family member or loved one, have to have all the answers. You don't have to know how to fix that person or do that. You just have to be there and support them and love them, like you've mentioned. And And this is why the power of support groups is so important, because for some people, they don't have an understanding family or friend circle. They don't feel connected or part of a group. And that's one of our innate instincts, is that we want to feel part of something. And that's by going to a group where people who understand what it feels like to live with depression, understand what it feels like to navigate through this difficult journey, or they can just share coping skills. And I think being part of a group is really important. A loved one or family member could also be part of a support group and also learn and find new ways to support their loved one. I think it's just being open to having conversations and just being there, not feeling the pressure of having all the answers or being able to fix them. I think it's just coming from a place, again, with love and acceptance and understanding. And that's often some of the core values that you can bring forward to anyone who feels scared.
I'm thinking about the situations where perhaps you're sitting on the bus home with a colleague and they just happen to share that they're really not in a good space. And perhaps in that case, you wouldn't have had the time to go and research it and equip yourself with the right things to say. And you already mentioned that remove the pressure of feeling like you have to have the right things to say, because that's super important. What are some of the small things that we can say or do in that time and space where someone is being vulnerable and expressing their state with us?
I think the first step is just listening and having that conversation to say, I'm sorry that you're feeling like that. What does it feel like for you? How does it impact you? How long have you been feeling like this for? And I think spending the time and having that conversation just to really understand what their feelings feel like, how long it's been there for, what does it look like? And I think just having that open discussion where you can actually just do that active listening skills, so that person feels safe, that they can open up to you. Some of the things not to say is things like, oh, just think positively and you'll get over it. Or, pull up your socks and, we wish it was that easy. No one says, oh, just snap out of it, it's diabetes. But yet, unfortunately, sometimes people say, oh, just snap out of it, it's depression, just think positively, as if it was that easy. And I think it's just about being there and listening and finding out, so why was today really bad? What happened? What did someone say to you? It's just asking those simple the questions so the person feels heard and that you're actually listening to their story. And that in itself, just having a real conversation, just as you would with your best friend who's perhaps telling you what happened the night before on your favorite TV show or what happened when they went out. It's kind of finding out those details as well in a safe space. And I think also just validating, to be like, thanks for opening up. I'm sure that was really hard to do and to share that, but I appreciate it. That in itself just lets the other person know that you heard them, you saw them. And that could be a conversation around the water cooler. It could be a conversation that you have on the couch watching your favorite show with your brother or sister or friend. These types of conversations can happen anywhere. I think it's just about having an open ear and listening to someone who's feeling, a little bit lost.
Yeah, I think that's a great piece of advice. It's definitely something that I try to do, especially when someone expresses something and I'm a bit lost for words, is just pausing and saying, thank you.
And I think that's the thing, is that you don't speak to your friend about what's happened because you're waiting for medical expert advice, right? You're just wanting to be heard, and you just want a safe space to share how you're feeling. You're not always wanting those answers. And I think, we're typical, if someone comes to us with a problem, is we want to problem solve, and we want to feel like we can leave that conversation feeling like, oh no, that it's all sorted, we fixed it. And that doesn't necessarily mean the case with mental health. It could just be saying, thanks for opening up and thanks for sharing that. And I think it's just about having an open conversation around it. Allowing that conversation to even happen is already like 10 steps forward for that person. And just acknowledging it. So I think take the pressure off ourselves to have all the answers, to be experts. I mean, if someone had to come to you about quantum physics, you're not going to even try to engage in that conversation unless you're, a rocket science. And that's the same with mental health, is that people don't always want a quick fix or an answer. They just want to be heard and to have a safe conversation. often that person has really prepped in their mind beforehand and built up the courage to even start that conversation or open up. So it can be really hard. And if you just kind of validate and say exactly what you said, just thanks for sharing. And I'm sorry it's so difficult. I'm here anytime you want to talk again. That in itself takes such a huge burden off that person. You have no idea.
It would be useful for us to close the conversation today sharing some practical tips people can apply to check in on their mental health status.
So some of the practical things that anyone could adopt, whether you have anxiety or depression or just someone to look after your mental well-being, it's doing something small every day that fills up your own cup, whether it be something you enjoy, something that helps you to de-stress or decongest. It could be things like, and again, you have to have a go-to list, right, of what things you enjoy. Is it listening to your favorite music or your song that lifts your mood? Is it about having a relaxing bubble bath? Is it about going to bed half an hour earlier to make sure that you get a good night's sleep? Is it doing one thing every day just for yourself that just lifts your spirit, that lifts your mood, that's good for you? Whether it be a 5-minute walk outside in the sun, whether it be a calming app, just to, some meditation. And there's so many different things that you can go online and look at and learn about. And I think all it takes is 60 seconds out of your day where you prioritize your own mental health or mental well-being that could make a huge difference every single day.
I love that. So just take a few minutes every day to focus on something that brings you positive energy. And to just proactively plan your day to include that task or activity.
Yeah. Exactly. We always have these amazing long to-do lists, things we have to get done, but we never add ourselves to that priority list. And one of the biggest steps in really tackling or focusing on our mental health is to make sure we do add ourselves to our to-do list, even if it is only for 60 seconds or 5 minutes in a day. It's easy to find that time. And it's again about causing that habit, if you're doing it every single day, it gets easier to do.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I think it's really valuable information for people that may be listening at home and perhaps have not had these conversations in a safe space before. So yeah, I think we can leave it there for today. Thanks so much, Cassey, for sharing everything that you have around mental health and why it's an important conversation that needs to be had. I'm looking forward to connecting with other people in your team and just delving into many of the incredibly interesting and relevant topics surrounding mental health.
No, thank you so much for just giving mental health that space. I think it can help a lot of people, if not for themselves, definitely for someone that they know. So thank you very much for chatting.
Thanks for joining today's conversation. Perhaps someone came to mind who you think would benefit from listening to this episode. And if that is the case, do share a link with them. Connection Academy is available across all podcast platforms. Join me in further episodes in this series where I will be hosting more in-depth conversations on the topic of well-being, such as discussing the signs and symptoms of mental health in a bit more detail, self-care, and why it's so important for us to create space for love and belonging within our communities. I'm looking forward to connecting with you.